Good morning and welcome to the Lean Body Mind Podcast. My name is Steve and I will be your host and companion for the next 15 minutes, give or take. So grab your favorite breakfast beverage, assuming it's morning. So coffee, tea, mimosa, whatever, and let's spend a little time together. Once again, it is a pretty pleasant day, and looking at the extended forecast, it looks like there are going to be a lot of nice potential days in the next couple of weeks for me to do the podcast outdoors. And I may attempt to do it at a different location, to go out to a park, perhaps one of the ones that I showed early on in the course of this channel, which wasn't that long ago. But hopefully, some more outdoorsy stuff. I like doing these. It's a nice change of pace. I've got some notes for this podcast, and I think where I'm going to start is with a book review. So I had let all of you know that I was reading, or actually listening to, the audiobook of Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics by Dan Harris and Jeff Warren. I'm going to talk about this book both in terms of the audiobook and the book itself. First off, if you've read or listened to Dan Harris's first book, 10% Happier, you'll have a pretty good vibe for what this book is about. Although I would say that 10% Happier was a little bit more autobiographical in nature. It was really more, I think, about Dan's journey to learn about meditation. And I don't know that initially it was about learning meditation. I think it was just about finding some peace. And eventually he did find that in meditation. This book is sort of a combination of two things. Part of it is about meditation and very specifically overcoming a lot of the objections or mental baggage or emotional baggage or misconceptions even that people may have about meditation. And I think it's very effective in doing that. I think it's very effective in overcoming some of the doubts that people may have as they're trying to do meditation. Am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong? Some of the things that people can do to sort of sabotage their own attempts at meditation. I think the book is very effective at that. I'm going to say that a lot of this book felt like an ad for their 10% Happier app, which is, I know it's on iTunes, I suspect it's probably on Android as well. It's just one of the many, many meditation apps that are out there. And he wastes no opportunity, Dan Harris, talking about 10% Happier and the 10% Happier app. Honestly, I think I could have done with a little bit less of that. I think save that for the end. Save that as the punchline. You know, if you'd like to continue doing this, if you'd like to learn more, if you'd like more guided meditation sessions and videos and things like that, go to 10% Happier. Put that at the end. Just don't interject it constantly. Another big part of the book is this road trip that Dan Harris and Jeff Warren and Dan's group took in a van that, I forget, there was a funk or R&B artist, maybe it was George Clinton, that it used to belong to, and they took this on a cross-country tour, just promoting meditation. And there's a lot about that, and it bounces back and forth between that and some of the people that they meet, as well as overcoming the objections to meditation. And I think they weave that together really well, between talking to people at a military academy, talking to police officers, talking to a lot of people who you would think aren't necessarily going to be into meditation, and helping them get into meditation. So I enjoyed that aspect of the book. I also enjoyed the fact that it was narrated by both Dan Harris and by Jeff Warren. It's nice, I find, when you're in any sort of a training, to have it mixed up a little bit between presenters. I think if you listen to the same person consistently, even me, over time, you start getting used to their cadence, their delivery, and it's easy to start to zone out a little bit. So by splitting it up between Dan and Jeff, it kind of kept my attention in the audiobook. So let's talk about them as narrators. First off, Dan Harris is a newscaster. He does Weekend Good Morning America on ABC, or did. I think he just retired from that or announced his retirement to dedicate all of his time to 10% Happier. It's obvious he's a newscaster, very much a newscaster voice, and if that's slightly too much, you know, the book is called 10% Happier. He's sort of like 10% too much Dan Harris, 10% too much newscaster. Everything is a little bit too tight, I think, in terms of the articulation and the way that he varies his cadence and things like that. So if that's the sort of thing that might bother you, just be aware that's Dan. Dan Harris is also a very smart guy. He has an extensive vocabulary. It's not often that I find that there are a lot of words in a book that I don't know and need to look up, but Dan Harris knows a lot of words that I don't know and needed to look up. He also has an incredible knowledge of pop culture and historical events and throws a lot of little subtle references throughout the book that I think might go over some people's heads. In fact, there were a few that went over my head. But I think there are a lot that if you're not someone who thinks you could be on Jeopardy, there's a number of references that you might just not catch. Additionally, if this were a drinking game, the two words you would want to look out for, like you got to do a sip of beer every time you hear either the word equanimity or propuntia, because Dan uses those an awful lot. Propuntia is basically, I think it's a Hindi word, which means kind of like monkey mind. It's just when your brain just starts going all over the place. And I don't know about you, but I deal with a lot of propuntia. My mind is just always going. And worst off is when I wake up at 2 a.m. and it starts going. But Dan uses that word a lot. Equanimity is really about that state of calm and mental balance, especially when you're in a difficult situation, which is really what we want to achieve. So we want to get rid of propuntia and get more equanimity. But you will hear those words an awful lot if you're listening to the audiobook, and you will read them an awful lot if you're reading the physical book. The final thing about Dan is he leans heavily into a skeptic role. Part of me suspects that's just to create a greater contrast between him and Jeff, but there are times when, given that he's writing a book on meditation, that it feels like he's leaning, like I said, a little too hard into the role of skeptic on meditation. I think at times it's helpful though, because you can identify with it, especially when he talks about his struggles with meditation. As someone who's been meditating for 8 years, speaking of Dan, not me, I've only been doing it, a year and a half, but he talks about the things that he still experiences after 8 years, and that meditation is an ongoing experience. There's not really a destination. You're always kind of learning, and if you beat yourself up over whether you're doing it right or doing it wrong, that's going to be frustrating. And you may stop. So, on the whole, I would give Dan Harris an 8 out of 10 on this, in terms of his narration, in terms of his style. Oh, one thing I always let people know this, sort of the profanity counter in books. There are a few F-bombs in this book. Not a whole lot, probably less than half a dozen. And it doesn't bother me, but it does always, whenever I'm reading a nonfiction book, something that you wouldn't expect to have any sort of foul language in, when I hit something like that, it always just feels like a little bit of a speed bump to me. But just be aware, if you're doing the profanity counter, there is a little bit in here. It would be a mild R rating. I mean, that's across the course of, a little less than 300 pages. So not a lot. Jeff Warren is really sort of the mystical Jedi master in this book for meditation. And unlike a lot of meditation proponents, he's not one of these like, woo, mystical sort of guys. There's nothing about his voice that leads you to believe that he's all new agey. He's very relatable, very calm. He does, from time to time, get into a little bit of phrasing that is a little bit mystical, a little bit woo-woo, as some of you have referred to it, but also a very good voice. He's the sort of person that would be very easy to listen to on a guided meditation. And like I said, he does provide that good contrast with Dan. I think their interplay when they're having conversations in the book works well for the most part. I'd give him a solid 8 as well. There have only been a few times where I've chosen to buy the physical copy of a book after listening to the audiobook. This is one of them. And the reason for that is twofold. One is I want it as a reference book, and it's just tough for me, I think, to do markings on an audiobook and go back and find stuff. It's just way easier for me to put a little post-it note and use a highlighter and go right to a book. So that was one of the reasons. I wanted it as a reference, especially as I was going through. There are points in the audiobook where Dan will do these little guided meditations. And as I was going through, I thought, that would be a great appendix to this book. Because now I got to go back and I got to look for them and figure out where they are in the audio section or in the physical book. If you just put them into an appendix, that would be so great. Or have a table of contents at the end. Maybe it is at the beginning of the book. I didn't check that. No. It does not seem as if they reference what page numbers to find any of the specific meditations on for that either. So I'm gonna dock them a point on that. But the other problem with having a guided meditation, while I like guided meditations, in an audiobook is usually when I'm listening to an audiobook, I'm out walking or I'm driving, which, unless it's a walking meditation, probably you don't want that. And if you're driving, you certainly don't want any sort of a meditation. The whole closing your eyes part, I think, becomes especially dangerous. They do, at the end of the book, as they reference the 10% app, they say that all the guided meditations that Jeff goes through in the book are in the free version of the 10% Happier app. Now, I did purchase the 10% Happier app. What I want to do is probably once a month I will do a review of one of the apps that I have. And I mentioned, I'm going to come back to that in a second. Let me just put a bow on this review. I like this book. I think it's a good book. I think that if Dan Harris rubs you wrong, then you're not going to like this book. If you enjoy Dan Harris, you're probably going to like this book a lot. If you're sort of on the fence about meditation and you've got some worries or concerns or objections, whether it's time or focus or whatever it is, I think they cover pretty much all of them in here. It's a great book for you. And I enjoyed the audiobook, and I enjoyed it enough that I bought the physical book. On the whole, I'm gonna say 8 out of 10. So 8 out of 10 kind of across the board. 8 out of 10 on the narration for both of the authors, and 8 out of 10 on content. It could have been a 9 out of 10 if they would have had some better organization of the meditations. But that's it for Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics. Probably the next review that I will be doing will be Weightlifting is a Waste of Time by Dr. John Jaquish. I'm almost finished with that book, so we could see that one next week, and I'll give you my opinion on that. But back to meditation apps. I had listed a number of them that I have either purchased or am in the trial period of in the last podcast. And some of you recommended some others that I've looked at. One of them was, I believe, Insight Timer. I can tell you already, that's one where it's just blasting my email inbox with just every single day messages. I think a lot of these apps think that they are the one and only app that you may be using, and it gets to be a little bit overwhelming. But I will be reviewing eventually the 10% Happier app, as well as all the others that I've tried after I try them out for a month. So that, I think, puts a bow on both meditation and the book review, and is probably a good time to take a brief little potential ad break. So because I'm doing this podcast from outside and I've got the garden behind me, some of you may be wondering, how's the garden going this year? In fact, some of you have even asked in the comments. And it's a hot mess. Managing a garden is not super duper easy when the only thing you have to do is manage a garden. But when you're trying to manage a garden and watch a grandson and manage 2 YouTube channels simultaneously, it's not been getting nearly the amount of love that it needs from me or my family. And I've largely put the onus upon my family to look after it. I give them some tips. I'm like, hey, could you do such and such out in the garden? And I'll say that my wife has done a pretty good job harvesting tomatoes. In terms of really working the vertical garden, she hasn't been super duper on that. In the years where I do it, those tomato plants behind me, those would be about 8 foot tall. They're probably somewhere between 5 and 6 right now, but in a way, that's fine. We still have so many tomatoes. So many tomatoes. We're starting to do some canning, and I've done a bunch of canning of various peppers so far as well. I'm really on top of the peppers, so we got that going well. I've got some Tabasco fermenting, so I'm doing a fermented Tabasco sauce. So right now I'm fermenting the chilies probably for about another week, and then I think they'll be ready to blend up and start making into a sauce. The wife made some tomato jam the other night with my help, and that is just amazing. I have no idea what the carb count is on it. I suspect probably high, because it's really sort of intensifying and concentrating the tomatoes down into the sauce when it becomes a jam. I used allulose for my sweetener, so there's no sugar in it, but I think the natural sugars in there are probably sufficient enough to rack up a decent carb count. In terms of the cucumbers, if I never see another cucumber probably till next summer, I think I'll be okay. I have really gotten sick of cucumbers. And I'd asked the wife to trim back the cucumbers because they're just growing like crazy. Let it focus the energy. I live not that far away from a small airport. Looks like a Cessna going overhead right now. But I'd asked the wife, I said, well, I don't know if I asked her or told her. Maybe I told her and said please, but to trim back the cucumbers. Let it focus its energy on a handful of vines, and we got to stop the growth. Plus, I said it's getting too heavy and it's going to break my trellis. I don't know if you can see it back there. I'll take a picture and put it right here. But, yep, trellis broke. So, but that's fine because I don't care. I don't want any more cucumbers. We'll probably make some pickles and jar those, but I've had enough cucumber salad. Enough's enough. But I think that's going to be it for the garden. What else do I have on my list here? One of the things that I'm going to really start doing over the course of this podcast is the monthly sort of challenge. And it may be a challenge that's specific for me, and if you want to join in, you can. I've had some people say that, they're a little bit older, or maybe their health isn't as good, so they don't want to be doing a plank challenge or something like that. Could we do something a little bit easier? And I'll be letting people know next Monday on the Not So Serious Keto Video Podcast that my 24 and 21, for those of you familiar with that concept, is going to be doing something physical. So whether that's stretching or something that works my cardiovascular system or strength training or something like that. But I want it to be how can Steve get in his best shape by the end of this year, over the next 4 months in 30-day blocks. And for September, it's going to be using this VR app that I have called Supernatural. It's these guided workout things. If any of you are familiar with the game Beat Saber, which is basically you're swinging lightsabers at targets in VR, it's like that, but with more movement, and it's coached. And I did the first session yesterday and felt it, really felt it. So I'm going to be doing that. I don't expect all of you to do that. In fact, I don't know that any of you will do that. I suppose it depends on if you've got a VR headset and are interested in something like that. You can do that too. But my 30-day challenge for me and for those of you who want to be part of it is just do anything physical for the next 30 days. That could be a walk in the morning, a walk after dinner. It could be weight training. Just do something that gets yourself moving, something that feels like you're doing some good for yourself. That's my challenge for this month. But I think that is going to be it for this Lean Body Mind podcast. I hope you enjoyed our time together. I do. And we'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.